The nation's current GDP now stands at $510 billion, and that's official. These figures came today during the rebasing of the nation's economy at the event where the Finance Minister, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, describes not only as historic, but an exercise that will bring about accurate data in the measurement of the nation's development. During the unveiling of the nation's GDP in Abuja, the capital city, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala said that Nigeria is now the 26th largest economy in the world, ahead of countries like Austria and just behind Argentina.
I'm just going to make a few remarks on policy implications so that we can open up the floor to Q&A. But before that, the process, I think, that we followed, it is worth underscoring again. The work that was done by the Chief Statistician and his team was subjected to review by a panel of 6 Nigerian experts. Professor Lu Ajakaye, who is here today and has spoken on behalf of the Nigerian experts, Professor Akpanepo, Dr. Ayo Teriba, Dr. Doyin Salami, Professor Garba, and Dr. Yemi Kale. So we had our own Nigerian experts to look at these numbers to make sure they were internally consistent and that they were within the range and well put together. And then we, of course, I think the statistician had all along an IMF consultant working with them, because that's the key job of the multilaterals, particularly the IMF. And later subjected the numbers again to checks through a team of multilateral institutions, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and the IMF, all took a look. So it's been quite a rigorous process, and it's, as the Chief Statistician said, or the Statistician-General said, this could have been released much earlier. But the idea was not to rush to release numbers, but to make sure that the numbers we're releasing have the support, endorsement, review, quality check of various constituents, our own Nigerian experts, as well as the international community. And that is how we got here today. So I'm very grateful to all of those who have participated. Let me now just make 1 or 2 points. I think some of the highlights in terms of policy that we need to talk about have been mentioned. But let me start by saying that Nigeria's, just to remind you of a few key things, Nigeria's estimated GDP in 2013 is 80.2 trillion naira, or approximately $509.9 billion. Nigeria has moved to the largest economy, to be the largest economy by GDP size in Africa, and has moved to be the 26th largest economy in the world, moving 10 positions up. On a per capita basis, Nigeria is number 121 in the world. So we have the total GDP size, where we have moved to 26. We also have the per capita. On a per capita basis, we are about $2,688 per capita now, and moved up from about 135 in position to 121. So even though our GDP size is large with respect to Africa, you know, on a per capita basis, with respect to, our GDP size is large with respect to Africa, and even with respect to the world. We are number 26, but remember that when we measure it, divided by the sheer number of people in the country, we are at number 121. So we should also not get carried away by the whole exercise. Now, let me mention a couple of things. I think one of the biggest things here is the fact that we have this information, we're measuring better, and it has shown us that the overall structure of the economy is changing, as Professor Ajakaye said. It's changing. The share of agriculture has declined from 33% of GDP to 22% now. At the same time, the share of services sector has increased from 26% of GDP to about 51%, whilst industry has remained around 25-26%. of GDP. Just to remind you that services is composed of various subsectors, including transportation, information, communication, arts and entertainment, financial and insurance services, real estate, public administration, education and health services. All of this is broken down in the handouts that you have. It's interesting to note that the share of GDP for some sectors already mentioned are now quite important and significant, and it's important for policy. Manufacturing, as was said, moved from about 2% to almost 7% now, which is significant. And telecommunications moved from a very low number, I think 1 or 2%, to about 8.7% now. And Nollywood moved from nothing, 0.000 to about 1.2% now. Was not even included in terms of the GDP that was being measured. A lot of telecommunication services, a lot of the whole of Nollywood, and a lot of the services in the retail and informal sector were excluded from our GDP, and these have now been brought in terms of the measurement. You've heard that this rise in services is not unusual for any economy. And the fact that agriculture is now at 22% does not make it any less important. It's still a strong share of GDP, and that is why we will maintain our focus. So what does this all mean for government's economic diversification policies? The first is that, what Nigerians have been wishing for an economy that is more diversified, is showing up in these numbers. With the better information, we can see that our economy is more diversified than before. The share of oil and gas has dropped to about 15.9%. So it's no more the overriding sector, but it is still important. If you have a country in which the share of any sector is 10% or more, then it's still important. But it's other sectors, namely these services, and within services, telecoms, entertainment, and so on, are making a bigger mark. So we have a more diversified economy. What does this mean? It means that for government policy, the direction in which we have been walking, in terms of supporting diversification, we just need to continue.